Welcome to How to Speak Socialist Level 1. I'm so glad that all of you were able to join me tonight. Thank you for joining me on this wacky ride into the most dystopian parts of our culture. The things I'm going to show you tonight might terrify you. I'm not going to lie. I certainly have had people come through this course before that left in kind of a state of shell shock with the amount of information I'm throwing at you. But at the end of the day, this is something that's so important for everyone to understand because we in the United States and in other countries too, but this is heavily focused on the United States, are living in the midst of a literal cultural revolution. And it's a tricky one to navigate because that cultural revolution is spoken in the language of socialist. What do I mean by that? When we're dealing with the far left in this country, you have to understand these are people who have spent the last century in the United States taking over every major institution in our culture. They've taken over the universities. They've taken over the K through 12 schools. They've taken over media, entertainment, journalism. They've taken over corporate America. They are in every single sector of our government. They are in the military. There is not a single, they're in religion, in the churches. They're actively trying to co-opt the churches right now. There is not a single institution in the United States that is not almost completely controlled by the far left. But most people don't notice it because leftists speak a different language. It sounds like English, but really it is an entirely different dialect. And that's how they're able to take over these institutions right in front of us without any of us even realizing what's going on. But I have spent the last 3+ years, almost every single day, watching their trainings, watching their events, watching their conferences, watching their presentations, watching them talk about their books, watching them teach each other. And in the course of doing that, and if I'm honest about it, this happened rather accidentally for me. It wasn't something I set out to do. It just happened. In the course of that, I was able to decode their language to make it easy for you guys to understand it. And once you learn how to speak socialist, it is a crazy thing because you will start seeing socialism show up literally everywhere around you, from the movies you watch to the TV shows to the meetings you have with your kids' teachers to something you see on the news to something that the president says to something that you happen to see on just like a random YouTube video. And you're like, I didn't know that person was a socialist, but they're speaking in the language of socialist. And that's how you know. This is what is going to inoculate you to the tricks that the far left plays in this country, because once you learn how to speak their language, that's when we can really be in a position to be able to nullify the effect of what they're trying to do. So we got a lot to go through tonight. Now, I just want to make sure that people know who I am, just in case you wandered into this presentation, or maybe you're watching the video later. Hi, I'm Carlin Borisenko. That is me, literally dressed as a socialist. What I do is I'm a psychologist by training. I'm an industrial organizational psychologist, so I have a lot of experience with the psychology of groups within organizations. And what I've done is I've applied that knowledge and become an accidental investigative and undercover journalist covering the far left. I'm the author of a book called Actively Unwoke, the ultimate guide for fighting back against the woke insanity in your life. I write a Substack, Carlin, KARLYN.substack.com, where I continue to break down the woke left ideology. I post video clips just like you're going to see in the presentation tonight. I keep you up to date on the latest news and what's going on. I also host a show called The Cult, Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. on YouTube, on X, and on Rumble. And of course, I have my flagship show, which is coming up, I think, over almost to like 100 episodes pretty soon, which is actually pretty exciting, which is Socialism Saturday, which is airing every Saturday at 6 p.m. on YouTube, X, and Rumble. And much of what you're going to see here today actually came from Socialism Saturday. Fun fact, Socialism Saturday started out as a joke. It was that I had been doing this show just to blow off steam called Sassy Saturday. I had a co-host, and one day my co-host said, Carlin, I can't do the show anymore. I'm getting busy. I have to go to work and stuff like that. And so I had a free Saturday, and I didn't have a co-host to do this Sassy Saturday thing anymore. And just by happenstance, I happened to see this thing called the Socialism 2022 conference. And I was like, they're streaming a socialism conference on YouTube, like live, and it happened to be streaming on a Saturday. And so I was like, all right, well, do you guys want to watch socialism on Saturday instead of doing Sassy Saturday? We'll do Socialism Saturday. And we did that. And it was like we were instantly hooked into socialism. And once you start watching socialism, perhaps not for everyone, but for some people, it can become a little bit of addiction. It can become a little bit of a problem. And once we started watching socialism, we just couldn't stop. And it was one of those things where I had been watching woke training, diversity training, college classes, that sort of thing for like a full year and a half before we really discovered the hardcore socialism. But what was interesting to me about really running into the most radical far leftists is that it seemed as though every single problem that I had been seeing in woke trainings in organizations seemed to all come from the same place, because the problems that we were seeing show up in the workplace or in schools or in entertainment or any of that, with critical race theory, with gender ideology, with defund the police, with environmental justice, with anything social justice related, when you start watching the far left, the radical far left talk about these things, you find the origin point of these ideas. And so in watching socialist training videos, we were really able to get into deep dives into who are the activists that are actually pushing these ideas in the country? Who's pushing critical race theory? Who's pushing gender ideology? Who's pushing attack on parental rights? Who's pushing all the defund the police stuff? Who's organizing on the college campuses? Who's pushing all the environmental justice stuff? It all comes from the same place, and that is the radical revolutionary far left. And so we started watching a lot of this stuff. I even went undercover at the Socialism 2023 conference as a nice little anniversary, 1 year anniversary of Socialism Saturday. And yes, if you think that I didn't dress like my thumbnail at the Socialism conference, I absolutely dressed like my thumbnail at the Socialism conference because I had to. Anyway, what you guys are going to find tonight is that we are going to take you through a series of videos where I'm going to introduce you to the language of socialist. And as I already explained, what you need to understand to be able to get the most out of this experience is that the far left speaks in a coded language. And when you learn how to speak that coded language, you will start to see it show up everywhere in your life. And what I need people to understand is that a lot of you, especially if you are newer to this content, and this is not your fault, but a lot of you believe things about the left that are wrong. There is a big difference between what the right or people who listen to influencers who claim to be experts in Marxism, there's a big difference in what those people say and what the left actually believes. And I got to tell you, I have seen, there has never been a time in the past 3 years where I've seen that difference be more pronounced than what we are actually seeing go on in the real world right now. So I'm going to give you a very, very recent example. What does the word intifada mean? What does that word mean? If I were to ask most conservative influencers what that word means, they would say it's an anti-Semitic slur that is calling for the eradication of all the Jews. That is the story that's being perpetrated online about this word. Now, it is certainly true that for the conservative right, that's what that word means. However, when you're talking about the radical, revolutionary, socialist, and communist left, they have a completely different definition of the word. And I know that because less than 2 weeks ago, I interviewed 2 members of the Revolutionary Communists of America. These are some of the most far-left communists that you are going to find in the country today. And at the end of the interview, they explicitly defined what intifada means for them. So let's watch.
At that meeting, of course, nobody's going to kick you out. You know, just
cool. Fair enough. Well, I'll look forward to that.
But I warn you.
Intifada means a worldwide socialist revolution in which they are laying the foundation for communism. Hang on, there's my other screen. There we go. That's what that means to the socialist left. So now think about what happens when you have one side of the aisle that believes a word means one thing, but the actual people they're talking about believe that word means a completely different thing. Oh, you guys are saying the video didn't play? It played on my end. I can try again. All right, I will try again.
But if you're respectful at that meeting, of course, nobody's going to kick you out. You know, just
cool. Fair enough. Well, I'll look forward to that.
But I warn you, being surrounded by hundreds of communists, you might just get convinced. You know, you might pick up a copy. You might pick up the latest copy of the communist newspaper and read through it and decide that you actually are in favor of a worldwide intifada, by which we mean a worldwide socialist revolution that would lay the foundations for communism for our kids and our grandkids.
All right, did it play that time? It played correctly that time. Excellent. I'm glad to hear that. All right. So but the point of this is that this word that's been all over conservative media, where conservatives are defining it as one thing, actually means a completely different thing to the people using those words. And so what happens when you have a group of people that say the word means one thing, but the actual people they're talking about, it means a completely different thing to them? What's going to happen is that the conservative right is going to completely misdiagnose the problem of what is going on, because they do not understand that even though the left is using the same vocabulary as them, they are not using the same dictionary. And if you do not understand what the problem is that you're trying to solve, then you're not aligned on that, then you are never going to be able to make any headway for the problem. So right now we have a conservative right that is saying it's anti-Semitism is driving the protests all over college campuses. No, it's not. It's absolutely not anti-Semitism. It's Marxism. This is the Marxist indoctrination that's been going on in schools for 100 years, and every single thing we see these students acting out on college campuses today is coming directly from that ideology. And we're going to watch at least one more video that I might be able to prove that to you by the end of this. But what I want to really jump into things, because listen, the videos we're going to go through, how I analyze the left is a little bit different than how most people do this. Most people talking about the left today go back and they look at the academic philosophy, the literature, the journal articles, the books that people wrote. And while I think that that is really a valuable thing to do, and I will never say otherwise, how I approach this is a completely different way. What I'm doing is an ongoing qualitative and linguistic analysis based on watching real world trainings, real world events, the things that the socialists are teaching each other behind closed doors. I've accessed this information because, quite frankly, it is all over the internet. You just need to know where to look for it, and then you can find it. A lot of this stuff is publicly available on video. However, I have also gone to their events in real life with the door shut, where there is no video camera, and I've seen them in that environment as well. And guess what? It's actually no different than seeing it on the internet, which is a good thing, because we want to make sure we're analyzing the correct set of data to be able to understand what they mean. Our goal today in terms of learning how to speak socialist is not that we're trying to debunk them. And I need everyone to resist their urge to do that. And I know that's going to really grate at some people. You're going to want to say these people are crazy. This is not what that word means. That's not what that word means. But you have to understand and wrap your head around the fact that the goal of this is not to get them to agree with you. The goal of this is to get you to understand them. And you do not have to agree with them in order to understand them. But unless and until you understand how they are defining words and how they are using language, you are not going to be able to come close to solving the problems that they're actually causing. And socialists will flat out tell you what they're doing. They will flat out tell you what they're doing in these trainings. I want to watch this video because this video is highly relevant to what we're seeing go on in the world today. And this was a video that I found in November of 2023. So over, like 6 months ago now. It was actually filmed in November of 2022. This is from the Party for Socialism and Liberation. And this is about a book they wrote called Socialist Reconstruction. But what you're going to hear them say in this video is they're talking about the fact that the 2020 riots are going to happen again in 2024, and they're going to be even bigger this time. Keep in mind, this was recorded in November of 2022. So this was recorded almost a year and a half ago. Hang on.
I think that, we are heading into, it's not me, the party's assessment of a highly explosive moment in U.S. politics. And it seems somewhat calm right now. Maybe, there's it's not 35 million people in the streets like the summer of 2020, but that's going to happen again. And that's going to happen with actually greater frequency. And even, I would say, even on a bigger scale in the years to come. And our goal is to try to win a majority of the working class to socialism explicitly. Because if we just are in the struggle and then people say, hey, you're a really good organizer, and you say, yeah, I'm glad you're working with me. How about, socialist revolution? It's a big jump because they've already heard all these other things about socialist revolution. So we have to be able to win people to the idea of socialism as we're organizing in the ongoing struggles. We can't do it in a dogmatic way where we say the answer to every problem is socialism and socialism is our only demand and so forth. But as people begin to move, they begin to question things. And there's always time to take a few seconds, take a few minutes, organize a meeting or a study group to really think about big picture politics. We named the book Reconstruction, Socialist Reconstruction, for a reason, because this country has seen highly explosive, turbulent times before. And the history of Reconstruction is one where the formerly enslaved really led the way in a lot of areas in trying to recreate society in the ashes of the old. And so there is a radical revolutionary history that we also need to study here. So organizing and studying, it all has to go together. But the 2024 elections, could become the site of a serious, almost pre-revolutionary crisis in the United States. And it might seem.
Whoa! The 2024 elections might become a site of a serious pre-revolutionary crisis in the United States. What do we see going on right now? What do we see going on the last couple weeks? And honestly, the protests that we've seen on college campuses over the last couple weeks, they didn't start 2 weeks ago. They started on October 8th. They started right after October 7th, and there's been a gradual, slow buildup. But here's what you need to understand. The Party for Socialism and Liberation is actually helping to organize those protests on college campuses. They've been documenting their involvement in it since the very, very beginning of it. They were telling us back in November of 2022 that they were going to do this, and now they're quite literally going out and doing it. There are groups from this organization that we just watched all over the country right now on all the different campuses. They're taking video, they're helping the students, they're advising the students, they're helping to rile the students up. They post the video on Twitter. It's all right there. We just need to listen to what they're saying. That's why we do this. If you are not familiar with my 4 goals of the woke left, this is something that I'm going to really encourage everyone to memorize, because everything that the left does has one or more of the same goals. Number 1, gain as much power as possible. Number 2, destabilize the system. Number 3, attack capitalism. And number 4, usher in their Marxist utopia. So let me just go through those one by one, and I'll explain to you how they all link together. Gaining power is about gaining institutional power. Institutional power, where you get a job in an institution that is really difficult to get fired from, is much stronger than political power. People on the right think that you gain power by getting elected to Congress, getting elected to the Senate, getting elected to the presidency, getting elected to your state government, getting elected to your school board. Certainly, all of those positions do come with some form of power, but that power is not half as powerful as institutional power, because political positions can go. Political positions change over all the time. You get voted out. You just don't want to do it anymore for whatever reason. Institutional power stays. That means it is much more long-lasting and much more entrenched than political power. So what the left has been doing for the last 100 years, this is what the long march through the institutions was. It was literally to gain institutional power. Once they do that, they use that institutional power to enact laws and policies that fundamentally destabilize the system. Another way we can think of destabilization is they cause problems. They cause problems in the real world that cause people in the real world pain in some way. So the pandemic, they caused a problem by having all these mass protests around BLM during the pandemic where, rioting, burning stuff down, burning down people's businesses. What did they blame for that? They blamed capitalism. They took the problems that they themselves caused and they said, you know what's responsible for all these problems? Capitalism. Capitalism is the reason we have to do all of this. This is moving into goal number 3 now. They gain power. They enact that power through laws and policies to destabilize our system. They cause people problems. When people start to feel the pain of those problems, they then blame those problems on capitalism. And we're going to be talking a lot about what capitalism actually means, because it's probably not what you think it means in this presentation. What they're trying to do is turn society at large against the economic system of capitalism, because until they get rid of capitalism, they cannot usher in their Marxist utopia. These are the 4 things that the left is doing at all times. They are always trying to hit at least one of those goals, but oftentimes they actually can hit more than one of them within the same goal. So for example, the college protests, another great example of this. Not only are they destabilizing the system with the college protests, but they're also attacking capitalism, because they talk about how this is they actually literally called Columbia a capitalist institution, a colonial institution. They just saw that at UCLA last night. So they're destabilizing the system by having these big old encampments, and they're using that to attack capitalism, which they see the institution as symbolic of. And then the reason they're doing that is because they're trying to replace capitalism with Marxism. Once you start to memorize this and you start to recognize this pattern, you start to see it show up everywhere. I want to play you this video of one of our favorite education leftists. His name is Henry Giroux. Henry is basically the person that is responsible for bringing Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed to K-12 schools in America. He is a protege of Paulo Freire, and this is essentially the far left. This is the source of the far left indoctrination going on in schools today. Let's listen to Henry talk about how he wants to use education to make the world what he considers to be a better place.
Make it clear that the struggle over democracy, the struggle over the future, the struggle over agency, the struggle over identity is really in part about the struggle over education, both in and outside of schools. And maybe one last thing. I don't see how you can do any of this without developing a set of anti-capitalist values. I mean, I think that the talk about capitalism and democracy is an oxymoron. It doesn't exist. Any society that claims that profit is more important than human needs is a dying society. And it's just a matter of time before that society will exhaust itself and all of a sudden turn to fascism in order to legitimate itself. And I think that's what we're now seeing. Neoliberalism has failed on its promises. So now it blames blacks, blames refugees, blames immigrants, blames Muslims, anything to deflect, its own systemic economic failures and the massive amount, and I use this word very very strongly the massive amount of inequality it has caused. Because that's the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is inequality.
What socialists believe is that capitalism creates all inequities in the country. Tracy just said white people in the chat. No, Tracy, not about white people. We're about to get into that because it's not about white people at all. I understand why you think that. However, let me show you this video from the Socialism 2023 conference. And you can see that our friend Mary is one of my favorite socialists that says so many of the quiet parts out loud. It's beautiful. Mary is very white. Mary's friend on the stage is very white. It is a common misperception that the left hates white people. That's not true. And you're going to see that in this presentation. But based purely on the amount of white people pushing this ideology, I just don't know how we can make that argument. Anyway, let me play you this video and you're going to hear what the actual goal of the left is.
Ultimately, and if that wasn't clear from the end of my talk, that will require a revolution. We cannot be free under capitalism. We cannot be free in this society as long as any person is in prison, as long as any person is denied health care for something necessary. No, that will never be free.
What Mary just said in that presentation, we will not be free until everyone is free. What they mean is free from capitalism. This is why when you see things like Queers for Palestine, and people are very confused by that, what they need to understand is that the goal of queer theory is to abolish capitalism. We're going to talk about that a little bit later in this presentation. And what is going on the left right now is that they see the conflict in Palestine between Israel and Palestine to be a conflict between Israel as the settler, colonist, capitalist oppressors and the Palestinian, who are the indigenous proletariat. So what is going on college campuses right now is not about anti-Semitism. They don't actually even care that the people in Israel are Jewish. It's because for the left, Israel represents capitalism, and that is their number one enemy at all times. But let's get into our agenda tonight. We're going to be spending most of our time on what the definition of capitalism is and how whiteness means capitalism, how they're not really going after white people. They're going after the system that upholds capitalism. We're also going to talk just briefly about how capitalism created the gender binary. This is going to get us into gender ideology. We're going to talk briefly about how the nuclear family upholds capitalism to get into their attacks on parental rights in the nuclear family. And we're going to just dip our toes into the idea of queer being a far left political ideology that is designed to attack capitalism. Now, we're only going to dabble in those last three because I want to give you an idea of how all of this fits together into one picture. Next week, if you come back for part 2 of this training for level 2 of How to Speak Socialist, we're going to start to do a deep dive into queer Marxism, which is going to bring us more into gender ideology and more into attacks on the nuclear family. But I'm going to give you a little tonight just to whet your appetite because I do think it's very important for everyone to understand that, again, every single attack we see on anything in the country right now has nothing to do with that thing specifically as much as it has to do with them needing to attack that thing in order to abolish capitalism. All right, let's dig in. What do socialists mean when they say capitalism? Some of you might think, well, capitalism isn't a perfect system. There's crony capitalism. There's corrupt capitalism. There are a lot of problems with capitalism. Maybe the socialists have some points. No. You need to stop doing that. Because the people who are doing that don't understand that the far left has a very, 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 very specific definition of capitalism. They define capitalism as private property ownership. And so now we have to ask, what do they mean when they say private property? They mean your ability to own a home, your ability to own land, your ability to own a business, your intellectual property that might go along with any sort of business you own, your ability to own an apartment rental or an Airbnb rental that you rent out as a landlord. But here are the two that are the most important. They mean your parental rights, your kids, the nuclear family, and they also mean your individual liberties. So the left very literally considers parental rights to be a form of private property that they want to abolish. The left considers your individual rights, individualism, meritocracy, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. They consider all of those things to be a form of private property that they want to abolish. So not only do they want to take away your ability to own a home, own land, own a business, even have a private kitchen in your house, by the way, that's something that's on the chopping block too. The biggest things that people don't understand is that your kids are a form of private property under the ideology of the left. This is where things start to get very, 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 very dangerous. So let's start to dig in. I want to prove to you that socialists believe that capitalism is a form of private property. Now, what we're going to watch, this is actually a video from the Party for Socialism and Liberation, that one that we watched earlier that was talking about the 2020 riots happening again in 2024. This is from that same group. This was from a 6-hour socialism conference that they held in Atlanta, Georgia, I believe back in 2022, but we watched it last year. And in this video, you are going to hear them explicitly say that capitalism is private property. Let me find the video and let's watch. Hang on. Hang on. You guys aren't seeing that video, are you? I apologize, guys. I've never had these problems with this tool before. Let me try again. Let me try loading it again. All right. We're going to give this one more try. Olga, can you please pop that question in the Q&A tab for me? I would appreciate that.
Secret, climate change, war, and the list really goes on and on, right?
All inequality is created because of capitalism.
While millions of people recognize that capitalism is at the root of the issues that we face, and simply could not be what solves these crises.
We can't solve equality or climate change or any other crisis in our society under capitalism because capitalism created the problems in the first place.
How capitalism can be replaced seems a little bit less clear to some people. Many of us here might identify as socialists, hopefully, and see that, yes, socialism is the answer to these issues of capitalism. Even the comrades before said capitalism is the disease.
Yes! We can't solve this under capitalism. Socialism is our answer. Socialists define capitalism as private property. That is the definition. It's not about crony capitalism or corruption or any of that. That's not why they want to get rid of capitalism. They define capitalism as private property. Private property is what they want to abolish. She just said, once private property is removed as the engine of society. Let's experience that magic again.
And each chapter in the book illustrates that another world isn't just possible, but so quickly achievable, right? Once private property is removed as the engine of society and the existing resources and power structures that we have are reorganized to meet the needs of the people and the planet.
I'm not seeing an ad. I don't know what is going on with these videos tonight. I've never actually seen this happen on this site before.
And power structures
Oh, there it's back.
that,
Okay.
that we have are reorganized to meet the needs of the people and the planet.
All right.
It's
I
no
think-
secret.
Okay, I think people got that, right? I think people got that in the video. She said that in order to replace capitalism with socialism, they needed to remove private property as the engine of society. Okay? Yeah, Sam says you two must have effed with the YouTube F with their system, essentially. So we're just gonna have to work through it, guys. We're gonna get through it. Tracy asks, then what happens? Well, then Tracy, and again, guys, please remember, if you have questions for me, please put them in the Q&A tab, because I'm not always going to be able to be seeing the chat, okay? So then what happens after they remove capitalism or private property ownership? You no longer have a right to own a home. You no longer have a right to own land. You no longer have a right to own a business. You no longer have a right to own intellectual property. You no longer have parental rights over your children. The state owns your children. And you no longer have individual liberties like freedom of speech or freedom of religion. That's what happens. That is what the left is going for. I do see that Mary asked a good question for this moment right now in the Q&A tab. Mary says, is private property the same as personal property? No. However, this is a false analogy that socialists try to use to confuse people. When you call them out on the fact that they want to take away your ability to own private property, what they're going to say to you is, we don't want to take away private property. We don't want to take, or excuse me, they're not going to say that. They're going to say, we don't want to take away your stuff. There's a difference between private property and personal property. Well, what they mean when they say personal property is like your computer or your phone or all your books or your clothes or things like that. But for our purposes, that doesn't matter, because the socialist left explicitly defines private property as your home, your land, your business, your intellectual property, your apartment rentals, your parental rights, and your individual liberties. And so if you don't want to lose any of those things, then you have to take this threat by the far left very, very, very seriously. Tracy asks, how is that good? Well, Tracy, the socialist left has very different values than you do. What they are trying to do in the elimination of private property is to give everyone access to exactly the same resources. That is what equity means. It means everyone has access to collective resources. And what the left believes is that if everyone has access to all of the resources they need, then there will be no crime, there will be no hunger, there will be no starvation, there will be no inequity. Like, everyone will have access to a home and education and everything they need. But what the left doesn't take into consideration, I don't think, is that the government is going to control all of that. And they won't necessarily control it in the way that you like it. So I would recommend, Tracy, that you need to, like, I understand this can be overwhelming when you first start hearing it, but what I need you to do is zoom out and accept that this is the left's position and you are not going to talk them out of it. The left is a cult. They believe what they believe. They've been indoctrinated to believe what they believe since they were 5 years old, for many of them in the K through 12 public schools. And so our purpose here is not to try to change their minds, because that's not going to happen. Our purpose is to understand their perspective. All right, I want to play another video. This is actually a video from Judith Butler. Judith Butler is one of the godparents of gender ideology, along with Michael Foucault. And in this, Judith Butler is talking about how socialists reject the idea of individualism and of private property. And hopefully this works. Everyone cross their fingers.
Is the best way to make the case for freedom is to embody that freedom collectively in ways that make freedom into the condition and object of political desire. This means rejecting ideas of personal liberty based on property and self-interest alone in favor of new collectivities in which my freedom is not really possible without the freedom of others.
My freedom is not possible without the freedom of others, and we need to reject the idea of individualism based on property. That's saying exactly the same thing. They reject the idea of the individual putting themselves before the collective. If the individual owns private property, if the individual has a nicer house or more money or a better car or any of these things, they view that as fundamentally bad because the individual is not providing for the collective in an equal or equitable way. And individualism is one of the targets that they're trying to abolish when it comes to capitalism. Some of you may remember this, which was in the Museum of African American History in Washington, D.C. in 2020. It was all about the assumptions of a quote unquote white culture in the United States. But a lot of people were confused about this because they said, this isn't about white people. Like, why are you saying that white people are the only ones with rugged individualism or a family structure or a history or time management or that are able to work hard? Well, all of these things are not about skin color at all. They're about individualism and they're about meritocracy, which are both elements that the far left believe uphold capitalism. You see this very first bullet point, rugged individualism is a part of white culture. That's where they're going after your individual liberties, your ability to own a home, own a business, own stuff, build a life for yourself that is something that is yours and is done by your hand and is done by your work and is done by your effort. They don't want you to be able to do that. Here's another video I have. This is from a socialist training from Haymarket Books. And in this, they're going to talk about how basically the idea of capitalism is inextricably linked with the idea of individualism. One moment, please. I just got to find it.
Anthony Blaze's piece in the book, and I want to talk about it within a framework of neoliberalism. So I hate saying that word, but whatever. So we live up underneath capitalism, yes, but we also have this kind of late stage capitalistic ethos of neoliberalism that it encourages essentially the abatement of social amenities and resources that help folks to survive. And this is, like I said, rooted in this idea of individualism, this kind of fierce individualism, and also thinking about what Kim has said, thinking about how folks are not encouraged to kind of own their own labor. The state is trying to own every unit of labor, and that means also owning people's personhood and citizenship. And so neoliberalism is a system that actually encourages private industry to kind of be the middle actor between the government and the people.
All right, I've got a few more questions that have come into the Q&A pod, so I want to make sure I answer these because I do think they are relevant to what we're going on, what we're talking about right now. Olga says, do you think the students know they are protesting to further the four goals of the woke left, or are they being naive and being used by those pushing socialist values? The students know. The students know. I promise you the students know. The vast majority of those students know. The reason we know they know is because we can tune into their press conferences and we can tune into live feeds from the encampment where they're calling each other comrade. They're talking about Marxism. All of their demands are aligned with this. Their demands have to do with defunding the police and environmental justice and things that have nothing to do with Palestine because they know that this is about capitalism. The people that do not understand this are the people who listen to the news and the influencers on the conservative right. I'm going to be very blunt and tell you guys this. The reason that you do not understand this, and this is not your fault, okay? I'm not blaming you. I'm just explaining the cause of the confusion. The reason that you do not understand this is that you are probably listening to right-leaning influencers who themselves do not understand this because they never spend any time at all listening to what the left actually says. What the right-leaning influencers do is come up with a narrative or talking points that's going to gin up their audience and piss their audience off so that they get likes, clicks, and shares on the internet and they make more money. That is the goal of what the conservative right influencer sect does. They are not about telling you the truth. They don't even know what this is. I know that because I've been dealing with these people for a very, very long time. I wish this wasn't the case, but the fact is that the left understands all of this. And I'm going to prove that to you in the course of this presentation. It is the right that does not understand this because they don't listen to what the left says. Let me move on to a question from Barry. We ought to do this with understanding what the far left believe. What ought we? So, Barry, I kind of answered this earlier, but I'm happy to answer it again. What do we do with this? You are going to know what to do with this once you become fluent in the language of the left. When you become fluent in the language of the left, you will be able to recognize it everywhere. Now, you're going to say, that's not good enough. Like, you only want me to become fluent so that I know what's going on. I already know what's going on. Well, Barry, I promise you don't. I promise you don't. Because if you do not understand the language of the left, chances are you have no idea what the left is actually doing. And the reason that the left keeps winning over and over and over and over and over and over and over again is because people think they understand what the left is doing, but they do not understand the language they're using. So there is nothing that they can do to actually beat the left back because they're constantly trying to solve a problem that is not the real problem. This is why so many people on the right think that the left hates white people. The left doesn't hate white people. There are so many white people on the left, it's not even funny. But the right is constantly complaining about the fact that the left hates white people. And because they're focused on that as the problem, they're overlooking what the left is actually doing, which is attacks on parental rights to take away their kids. Do you see the problem here? So what do you do with this knowledge once you understand it? You share it with other people, you explain it to other people, and you actually use it to put strategies in place that combat the real problem that's going on, not the make-believe fictional one that it's being sold as a political narrative. You have to combat the real problem, but if you don't speak the language, you won't be able to ever do that. Jennifer says, do you think, oh, hang on. I missed a question from Jacob. So they seem to think that capitalism, private property created inequity, Jacob, which created crime, right? Yes, that is exactly what they think. So if they want to abolish the police, how do they rationalize rape, murder, and other violent crimes that don't involve property? And how do they expect to deal with those issues? The far left quite literally believes that crime will not exist in a world in which everyone has access to everything they need. That world is a world built on equity. They are quite literally teaching this to children, by the way. The reason that I know that that's what the left believes is that the UCLA School of Education has a whole curriculum around this where they are teaching children in the 3rd grade that in a society built on equity, which is Marxism, when people have everything they need, then there will be no crime and there will be no reason for the police. And I want to encourage everyone, don't debunk this. What I mean when I say don't debunk this is I don't want to see anyone in the chat going, that's crazy. There's obviously going to be crime. Obviously, they're wrong about that. Okay, fine. They have crazy ideas. Their ideas don't make sense in the real world. I get it. But guys, saying in a chat or saying on Twitter or complaining like on a YouTube video that the left doesn't know what they're talking about and they have crazy ideas is not actually going to solve the problem. It's not going to change anything. You are never going to be able to convince them of this. We have to accept that this is what they believe and work from that jumping off point. All right? Again, great questions. I'm not trying to shame anyone from asking questions. I want you to ask questions. I just really want you to understand that debunking it is not actually going to change anything, and it's not actually going to solve the problem. Jennifer asked, do you think private property could be extended to anything that can exclude? Like parental rights, parents don't have to let the community take part in kids' raising, which excludes the community. And Jennifer, I'm going to ask you to ask that question again because I don't understand exactly what you're saying. Can you shorten that for me a little bit? I think that would be great. Barry, you said in the chat, I have about 6 weeks of understanding and I'm approaching fluency. Barry, you're not approaching fluency. I don't mean to rain on your parade. I really don't. But if you were approaching fluency, you wouldn't be asking that question. I understand that you're in the process of learning, But the best answer that I have for you, and you're just going to have to trust me for this, is that it actually takes a lot longer to become fluent in this. You cannot, listen, I'm not suggesting that anyone is dumb, but the fact of the matter is you cannot become fluent in a foreign language in 6 weeks. And that's like saying you didn't know any French 6 weeks ago, and now you are approaching fluency in French. You're not. You might know how to speak more French now than you knew how to speak 6 weeks ago, but you got a long way to go. And I promise you're going to understand this when you actually approach fluency. This is why we're doing a crash course, okay? All right. Keep those questions coming. Let's move on. I want to get into this point of individualism, where this person is going to use a word called colonialism. Colonialism is a word that you're going to start hearing pop up, or have been hearing pop up over the last couple of weeks. Colonialism is what they're talking about when they're talking about what is going on in Palestine. So what they believe and why the left is on the side of Palestine is they believe that Israel is the settler colonists that have privatized the indigenous land in Palestine. And what that means, when they're colonizing land, they are imposing the oppressive force of capitalism, or they are taking what was previously collectivized land and privatizing it rather than it belonging to the collective. What they believe the Palestinians are doing is decolonizing the land, which is removing the oppressive force of capitalism and returning it to the collective. And so you're going to hear this person, which is also from our favorite socialist book publisher, Haymarket Books, talk about how capitalism, colonialism, and individualism, all those terms are related together. One moment, let me find the video.
And just elicit that deeper empathy and really reconnect us as this collective community, because capitalism and colonialism functions and thrives off of individualism. So if we can have that be a foundation in the way that we're reporting and telling stories, I think it's absolutely essential. And I completely credit it to everything I've learned in organizing and being in community.
All right, there's that. I see Barry saying in the chat, I guess I didn't convey the thrust of my question. Barry, what you're asking with your question is, what do I do with this information? The answer that I'm giving you, which I know is going to be unsatisfactory to you, but it is the answer that exists. And perhaps other people in the chat can advise Barry, the ones who have been with me for a longer time. The answer that I'm going to give you is, what do you do with this information? You will know what to do with it when you become fluent in the language of socialist. You will know why this is important when you get there. I know that's a deeply unsatisfying answer. I really, really get it. But that is the answer that we have for right now, okay? And other people in the chat can feel free to chime in, and you guys can have that conversation. So what's going on at the border? Right now, a lot of immigrants are being led across the southern border, and everyone's like, why is that happening? Why does the left want the border open? Why does the left want all of these immigrants flooding into our society? Well, the left... All right, back to Barry before we get into this. Barry said, so I'll figure it out, and there is no answer, so nobody else figured it out. No, Barry. See, guys, listen. I don't mind questions. I want there to be questions. I do mind smartasses. So Barry, and I'm going to ask other people in the chat, like Reagan and Bot and people, to kind of help Barry along here. Well, okay. Barry, many other people have figured this out. Bot says, what you do depends on the situation. You have to understand them. Does anyone else have any thoughts? Perhaps Reagan or Jenny or anyone that's seen this before? I hope some people do. I hope you guys help him out. But no, Barry, the reality is that there are many other people who have figured this out. But they're further along than you are right now. This is why I'm emphasizing this is about listening, and this is about understanding. And listen, guys, listen. I know that everyone wants to jump right in to what do we do? I get it. I get it. When I wrote, let me go back. When I wrote this book, Actively Unwoke, the ultimate guide for fighting back against the woke insanity in your life, I literally wrote 4 chapters of checklists to give people things to do. And so it's not as though there aren't things that you can do. But the mistake that I made when I wrote this book, and I wrote this in early 2021, is that if people did not understand the language, they were going to implement the tactics in a completely ineffective way. So let me give you an example. You get elected to school board. Okay, what do you do now? Well, a lot of people have gotten elected to school board that have ended up implementing socialist policies, supporting socialist candidates, implementing things that maybe sound good on the face of it because it's just about making all the kids safe in school, right? But were actually socialist initiatives to eliminate certain parts of parental rights. And those were all coming from conservatives. I'm not talking about stuff coming from the left. I'm talking about things coming from conservatives. Why did that happen? Because they didn't understand the language. So they rushed right into trying to do something because they're like, what do we do? There's a problem. What do we do? But they didn't fully understand the problem that they were dealing with. Learning the language allows you to fully understand the problem that you're dealing with so that you do not fall into the traps that the left is setting for you. And you will know when this happens. I've seen person after person after person that's been watching socialism with me for years say, oh my God, there was a moment where it just clicked and I understood it. And so that's what we're trying to do. And so you guys are welcome to jump right into tactics if you want. But to be quite frank, the reason that the conservative right continues to fail over and over and over and over and over again is that they are jumping into tactics without understanding the problem that they're actually trying to solve. This is why Moms for Liberty has been such a colossal failure. Moms for Liberty did not understand the problem it was trying to solve. It focused on something that actually ended up helping the left, and it got all these people, it ran all these school board races that they lost because they didn't understand the problem that they were trying to solve. That's tens of millions of dollars wasted. That's hundreds of thousands of people, the energy wasted that could have been better used if people just understood the language. So Barry's now got some great advice in the chat from people about what to do. Sam says, knowing the language allows you to identify the real issues and go after them. If you don't understand them, you will chase the red herrings. Jennifer says, what is next is using the knowledge to make informed decisions and forming questions that may cause someone to admit their true intent behind the language. Bot says it's like trying to fix a plane without ever learning how they work. Reagan says if you understand the language, you aren't reacting. The left is setting you up. Their action is your reaction. The left is smarter than you might think. All wonderful answers, guys. All wonderful answers. All right. Highland, and I'm kind of just going into questions. We're going to go through the presentation slides, so don't worry about it, but I'm kind of just keeping it a little bit more cash today. We're going to go through some of these questions, and then we'll go back and forth with the videos. We'll try something new this time. Highlander says, is socialist speak the same or a different than dialectic speak? I don't think it's useful to talk about like when you're using the term dialectic just means language. So how I frame this, Highlander, is learning how to speak socialist is learning how to speak a foreign language. Think of it like you're an English speaker and you're learning how to speak French, or you're learning how to speak Spanish, or you're learning how to speak Russian or Chinese or any of that, except that the language that you're learning, it sounds like English, which is what makes it tricky. But what they've really done is they've created a completely parallel culture in the United States that's run out of the universities, out of the schools, and they have their own separate language where they're using completely different definitions. So we are literally learning a foreign language. That's why it takes more than a couple of weeks to learn. Jennifer says private property as means of exclusion. In other words, the right to withhold access to something. That seems to be how parental rights is private property. A parent has the right to take a kid out of school and direct resources. That's not how, Jennifer, I'm sorry, that's not how parental rights are private property. Let me get to that section, but that's not a correct interpretation of what the left is doing. So I'm gonna ask you to sit tight on that one, and we'll get to that a little bit later. All right, let's get into borders. All these immigrants are coming into the country. Why does the left want open borders? Well, because borders serve capitalism. That's why they want to allow any immigrant they want into the country, because the left very literally does not believe that borders should exist because borders serve capitalism. Just need to find the video. There it is.
Who's the first person featured in that interview, is an incredible organizer, and she brought out incredible points that if we're challenging capitalism and colonialism as the roots of the climate crisis, then we inherently have to challenge borders, because colonial borders are constructed to dehumanize people. And, you know, we're seeing what's happening right now with the migrant crisis, especially in the States. Goods can continue moving freely across borders, but people can't. People who are in dire situations, who are really refugees, they're not able to move across borders. And it's just such an ultimate dehumanization, is that the tools that borders serve, which really just further perpetuate the legacy of colonialism and capitalism.
Borders perpetuate the legacy of colonialism and capitalism. I also want to point out that the person you see in the upper left-hand corner of that video, named Lucy Diavolo, Lucy was an editor at Teen Vogue. Teen Vogue delivers a lot of socialist ideology to young girls who just want to think about fashion. If you haven't read a copy of Teen Vogue lately, it is extremely far left, extremely socialist. That's just one of the ways they're getting to your kids. This video was taken actually at the beginning. It was taken right after October 7th. And this is where they're going to say that colonialization is the taking of land as private property. Again, private property being the definition of capitalism. And I want you to listen to what, so someone asked earlier, do the far left, do the college students know what they're protesting? Do they understand this? Well, you're going to see in this video, the same people who are out there protesting explicitly explain to you that this is all about private property. Let's listen.
Giving you all your food.
I want to go into the restroom.
You're holding up shit. All right.
Also, currently, this is a private property. I want to go into the restroom. I do need you to leave.
I know Israel loves taking private property and saying it's their own, but...
What did he just say? And I'll play it again. He just said, I know Israel loves taking private property and claiming it as their own. That's what they're saying happened when Israel, quote unquote, colonized Palestine. They took indigenous land and they privatized it under the oppressive force of capitalism.
Eden, you're holding up shit. All right.
Also,
we've given you all your food.
I want to go into the restroom.
You're holding up shit. All right.
Also, currently, this is a private property. I want to go into the restroom. I do need you to leave.
I know Israel loves taking private property and saying it's their own, but we gotta head.
You're not going to let me go into the restroom?
Them, so I need you to leave.
I want you to go into the restroom.
I need you to leave, please.
I was patroned here, and I have a right to go into the restroom.
And we have a right to
refuse service.
Yeah, but I need to go into the restroom.
I'm asking you to leave.
No, you need to let me go into the restroom.
I don't. I'm
a patron here, and I need to go to the restroom.
I'm kindly asking you to leave.
No, I will not be going to leave.
I'm kindly asking you to leave.
Okay? No, I want to go into the restroom.
That's fine. You can use our restroom. We have a restroom next door. You can use our restroom.
I want to use
it's a restroom.
No. I want. I should not be excluded and other people allowed.
saying no?
I want to go into the restroom.
And what is standing here going to do?
You're not going to let me into the restroom?
You can use our other restroom. We have another
No,
restroom.
I want to use this one.
They're not letting you.
All you want to get is a video
Other
of it saying
patrons-
that Zionism is
Why are you afraid? If
anti-Semitism,
you
because it
agree
is.
with it, why are you afraid that I will take a picture of it?
Oh, actually,
Okay.
yeah, great.
Why, if you agree with it, why are you afraid?
I'm not afraid of it.
Then why you're not letting me in?
Because this is what you're
Yeah.
History didn't start in 1948, ladies.
Free Palestine. Now
Free Palestine. It's always.
Please leave. Thank you.
It's always. Yeah, great. We love it.
So what it said on the mirror, because I know it was small, you might not have been able to see it. It says Zionism equals fascism. I want you to keep that in your back pocket. We're going to talk about that again in a second, okay? But they just said that this is about Israel privatizing the land. They didn't say anything about the Israelis being Jewish. They said it was about privatizing the land. Next, I want to show you. This is a video that was posted by Andy No, and this was at basically the start of the whole Israel-Palestine conflict, in which they are quite literally talking about seeing Israel as the same thing as capitalism.
Deal that final blow to Israel. When the state of Israel is finally destroyed and erased from history, that would be the single most important blow that we can give to global capital and to imperialism in our lifetime.
So what did they say? When the state of Israel is finally destroyed and erased from history, that will be the single most important blow we can give to destroying capitalism in our lifetime. The college protests that you're seeing right now are not about anti-Semitism. They are because the college students who know this is about abolishing capitalism, who know that capitalism is defined as private property, who know that colonialism is the same thing as saying the capitalist oppressors, who know that decolonization is not necessarily about a violent revolution, though it can be, and in this case it actually is, but decolonization is about removing the oppressive force of capitalism. This has nothing to do with the Israelis being Jewish at all. They could be any other group of people and the reaction would be the same, because it is about the capitalist oppressors and overthrowing capitalism so they can institute their intifada, which, as a reminder, what does intifada mean? Let's listen again.
But if you're respectful at that meeting, of course nobody's going to kick you out. You know, just
cool. Fair enough. Well, I'll look forward to that.
But I warn you, being surrounded by hundreds of communists, you might just get convinced. You know, you might pick up a copy. You might pick up the latest copy of the communist newspaper and read through it and decide that you actually are in favor of a worldwide intifada, by which we mean a worldwide socialist revolution that would lay the foundations for communism for our kids and our grandkids.
They are well aware of what this means. What we need to do is make sure other people know what this means. That's why we learn the language of the left, so that we can teach it to everyone else. Every single thing is related to capitalism. These are all just some words that you might see show up on the left that are basically synonymous with an aspect of capitalism that they are trying to abolish. Whiteness, white supremacy, racist, anti-racism, fascism, gender binary, patriarchy, abortion bans, queer theory, bourgeois, equity. Anytime they're talking about environmental justice, that's about capitalism. Anytime they're talking about universal health care, that's about capitalism. Actually, someone just sent me the first time I've actually seen hard evidence of this earlier today. Anytime they're talking about the abolishment of religion, they are talking about the abolishment of capitalism, because they believe that they need to get through religion in order to get to capitalism. Every single thing the left does is about capitalism, and people need to start understanding that, because again, this is going to impact every part of your life. This is going to impact your ability to own a home, to own land, to own a business, to have parental rights, to have a say over the raising of your children, and to have individual liberty. That's what we're talking about here. I want to start looking specifically at how whiteness means capitalism. Whiteness, and I can see there's a typo on that slide, but that's okay. Everyone's going to have to overlook that. Whiteness is not about skin color. I want to play you a couple clips from a woman named Cheryl Harris. Cheryl Harris wrote a seminal paper called Whiteness as Property back in 1993. It was published in the Harvard Law Review. 20 years later, Cheryl Harris gave a lecture at UCLA Law where she said a couple things explicitly. The first thing that she said explicitly is that whiteness is not a skin color.
Not a skin color or even a racial type. It is a social relation constructed on exclusion, structural privilege, and its valorization.
I'm going to play that one more time from the start.
Whiteness is not a skin color or even a racial type. It is a social relation constructed on exclusion, structural privilege, and its valorization.
Whiteness is a social relation constructed on privilege. It is a system, okay? Here's another clip from Cheryl Harris where she is explicitly saying that you do not have to be white in order to have access to whiteness.
Secondly, post-racialism's commitment to protect some value in whiteness, however relative, what Derek Bell called the promise not to be the face at the bottom of the well, it coexists with expanding whiteness to encompass non-whites. And I think Chuck was alluding to this a little bit yesterday. Post-racial whiteness is conditionally available to persons of any racial group, even some blacks.
It's available to anyone of any racial group, even some blacks. And the last clip I want to watch from Cheryl Harris is where she explicitly aligns whiteness with capitalism.
Mobilizing a sense of linked fate, that dismantling racial hierarchy is joined with addressing the problem of capitalism. These projects are placed in opposition, and the challenge to white entitlement or white privilege is then recast as an elitist, anti-populist project.
Do you guys see how this is starting to work? They've changed the language so that whiteness and anything related to it does not have to do with skin color. It does not have to do with white people. It has to do with the system that they believe upholds quote unquote whiteness, but they're using whiteness synonymous with the word capitalism. You don't believe me yet? That's okay. I've got a lot more references that we're going to work our way through. This is an example of how critical race theory plays into this. So critical race theory is not about teaching that white people are bad or wrong or evil or any of those things. The goal of critical race theory in schools is to abolish capitalism. And we know that because last year, a Colorado teachers union passed a resolution declaring capitalism inherently exploits children in public schools. And they were like one step away from saying that capitalism should be replaced with Marxism. Now, the person who actually introduced this resolution is an old friend of mine. His name is Brian Lindstrom. I met Brian in June of 2021, where Brian was openly bragging about the fact that he is absolutely going to teach critical race theory in his classroom. There's nothing you can do to stop him. And then 2 years later, we find out that Brian, the critical race theorist that is teaching this in high schools, is introducing and passing a resolution in the Colorado Teachers Union declaring that capitalism is inherently exploitative. And if you go through Brian's tweets, Brian is saying things like, can you be anti-racist and anti-patriarchy without being anti-capitalism? He's saying things like capitalism supports racism, heteropatriarchy, ageism, ableism, imperialism. So you can't be anti-racism, anti-heteropatriarchy, anti-war, anti-ableism without being anti-capitalist. He's tweeting over and over and over and over and over again about how capitalism is the real problem. You will not find one single tweet from Brian where he is talking about white people being the problem. In fact, Brian himself is white. I thought he was gay for a while too. Apparently, I've been assured by someone who actually went to school with him, he is not gay, but he is definitely white. And he never tweets about how white people are the problem, but he talks an awful lot about capitalism. Here is an example of a professional women's soccer player doing an anti-racist training online. And I want you to listen to the anti-racist trainer talking about whiteness and capitalism in quite literally the same sentence.
Let me say something else. Let me say something else. Because again, I told you I'm an independent people's worker. I'm happy that your people want to give me their money and they want to support me. I'll take it. Thank you. Thank you. Trust me. Thank you. But at the same time, when we start talking about intersectionality, which is white supremacy, which is gender, which is capitalism, Americans, white people, I need you to know that your money will not assuage you from your guilt. You cannot pay your way out of this. There aren't enough reparations in the world that you can pay us. And so you think because you write a check or you slide me something in Venmo that you're absolved and you can tell somebody, well, I gave Dr. Blay $100. I'm not racist. Dr. Blay is going to spend your $100 and still tell you that you're racist.
See, isn't that nice of her? She said the quiet part out loud. She said that whiteness and capitalism are the same. Here is an anti-racist training that some people in my community and I took recently, where you will literally see on the tentacles of the octopus, you have capitalism is the orange tentacle, white supremacy is the maroon tentacle, and then you've got the patriarchy down here is the red tentacle, trying to illustrate that all of these concepts are inextricably linked from each other. You've got the Harry Potter kids over here. Hermione is capitalism. Ron is cis heteronormative patriarchy. We're going to be talking about what that is in a second. Harry's talking about like racism again, saying all of these. Why is it when something happens, it's always you three? They're saying it is always these three things that are inextricably linked together. This is a picture from a socialist magazine that I got when I went undercover at the Socialism conference. It's from one of the most famous socialist activists, Angela Davis, and she was saying that racism cannot be separated from capitalism. Again, these concepts are inextricably linked. This is from a socialist podcast that features a professor at the University of Washington. Of course, the University of Washington is one of the schools right now that has one of those pro-Palestinian encampments. And so let's hear what they had to say about how whiteness and capitalism is linked together. Hang on.
And, for me, when I think about the way that capitalism works, it's really impossible to divide it from whiteness as a kind of a mechanism of creating order and creating hierarchy. And that's what race does in general, right? But I think it's really impossible to talk about how capitalism functions in people's everyday lives without talking about the role that whiteness has played in that.
Absolutely. And even more specifically, how like the current structures of capitalism were built hand in hand while slavery and while the country or people as a whole were basically, creating these race classifications as a way to force labor onto someone. And that in of itself, that like race was really invented like as a way to do that, as like a mechanism to force labor, and or from a way to ensure that hierarchy of that, like, some people will get something better than the other person, and then that creates sort of a hierarchy that you just kind of mentioned.
So what he essentially just said in that video is that capitalism invented race in order for some people to be owned as private property or slaves based on race, and that's what they mean when they say systemic racism. They believe that capitalism created racism by making it possible to own people as private property. The end result of that is systemic racism, but what's important about that is the system in systemic racism is what they're referencing when they're saying racism, white supremacy, whiteness, all of those things. The system that upholds racism, the system that capitalism is supportive of. Capitalism is essentially what they're referencing. I hope that makes sense. Let me introduce you to Dina Simmons. Dina Simmons is a far left teacher's trainer. She has worked in many school districts in the United States, including the Cambridge, Massachusetts school district. And I have Dina on tape doing a webinar for Haymarket Books in which Dina, again, specifically talks about capitalism in relation to whiteness.
that we're citing here, Angela Davis, Ruth Wilson Gilmore, and others, that a lot of their work is inseparable from anti-capitalism. Is abolitionist teaching anti-capitalist by nature?
Abolition is anti-capitalist by nature. You know, we know right now that capitalism is the structure that we are under. And so we're going to use this structure to our best ability. But what we also know is that capitalism will not free us.
And you got to remember that this country was built off of stolen Black labor, and that all of those folks who are positions of power who have that money, you got it because you stole it. You know, and I think, you know, it's always so funny. Can I throw money at that? I'm like, yo, that money is mine. Like, that money is mine, actually. You stole it, you know. And I think, of course, you know, being, you know, an abolitionist is anti-capitalism, right? Because there's a connection between capitalism and slavery in this country. There's a capitalism between, you know, how communities like redlining were built to disenfranchise people, how, you know, the hierarchy of structures in organizations, who gets paid and who has the power to say this, that's all capitalism. And honestly, to me, that's whiteness. And we have to eradicate whiteness. We have to abolish whiteness as well. And
last word, Goldie.
So I also want to point out that the woman on the far left right there, her name is Bettina Love. Bettina Love is a professor of education at Columbia University. She is one of the leading socialist education activists in the country, and they're all saying the same thing. And all these people know each other. They're all friends. They've all done panels together before. This is an assignment that was given out to students in 2020, and of course 2020 was the best time to ever find out what teachers were actually teaching, because you could see it all over the Zoom calls. But this was an actual school assignment in which they were comparing police officers to slave owners. Now, I've been ranting and raving on my videos and on my Twitter about how calling in the New York Police Department was basically the worst thing that Columbia could do at the start of the protests. I'm not saying they shouldn't have called them in after they completely lost control of their campus, but the mistake that Columbia made is very early on, before the students were really doing anything other than sitting on a lawn in a tent, they called in the New York Police Department to remove students from sitting on the lawn. This really pissed all the students off. And the reason it pissed the students off is that there is no issue that the far left cares more about than abolishing the police, defunding the police, abolishing the prison industrial complex. And what Columbia did when they called in the police officers is the next day, the protest quadrupled in size because of how many people this pissed off. If you watched any of the videos surrounding this, you would have heard the students at Columbia chanting NYPD, KKK, IOF, it's all the same. They were comparing the NYPD to the KKK. I just saw another video, and this goes back to the question of, do the college students know this? Yes, they do. I just saw another video from UCLA last night. You can find it on my Twitter. It's brand new, where there was when the police were trying to remove all the protesters from UCLA, one of them went after the police and started yelling at them, they're the KKK, the KKK, the KKK. That all comes back from this idea. What the left believes is that the police are the managers of private property. They believe that the police only exist because, and again, we are not debunking them. This is a crazy idea, but I need everyone to resist the urge to debunk them and just focus in on what they're saying to understand their perspective. What they believe is the police started as people who were catching runaway slaves. And today's police force is a descendant of the police officers who were catching the runaway slaves back when slavery was still a thing. They're the managers of private property. They believe the police only show up to protect other people's private property. We're going to go back to this clip from the Party of Socialism and Liberation, which again is helping out with these protests at Columbia, in which you're going to hear them say explicitly this. Hang on one sec, guys. I just need to find the video. I apologize. As you guys can see, I have a ton of videos in this presentation, which means I have a very long list I have to scroll through every single time I'm trying to find a video. Is that what it is? That might be what it is. Yes, hang on one second, please. Found it. Capitalism created crime, and therefore we should abolish the prison system and defund the police in order to accommodate the oppression that capitalism has wrought.
Statistic of crime statistics, and that indicates sort of the level of crime in society. This is completely wrong. Mass incarceration was developed as a social control, basically a system to deal with the contradictions of capitalism in a period in which the progressive movements were being pushed back in the 1970s, in which the cities were being hollowed out with deindustrialization, deregulation, in which the most progressive and vanguard forces in the Black community, the revolutionary organizations, were being destroyed. This was all a conscious idea to basically intimidate and lock up the communities that were most prone to rebellion and revolution created. So we talk about the complete dismantling of this mass incarceration system. And we actually go back to this question of abolition. We want to abolish and destroy the social conditions that give rise to crime. And we want to completely abolish the police as we know them, which have been only set up as basically the managers for private property.
Oh! You don't need to hear me celebrating anymore in that video, but yeah, the police are set up as the managers of private property. Let's get into the idea of anti-racism. Now, this is one of the ones that's actually the most overt when it comes to proving that the concept of whiteness, white supremacy, anti-racism all comes back to the concept of capitalism. This is a literal book from Verso Books. Verso Books is a very popular socialist book publisher. The title of the book is What is Anti-Racism and Why It Means Anti-Capitalism. They also did an accompanying video to it in which this is the literal thumbnail for the video. Anti-racism must mean anti-capitalism. Again, we are not talking about skin color. We are talking about the system that upholds racism. Whiteness was created when slaves came to America. That's the basis of systemic racism. They believe capitalism created slavery, slavery being the ownership of people as private property. Slavery created systemic racism. The system that upholds racism is capitalism. And that's why, in order to be anti-racist, you must be anti-capitalist. Has anyone ever wondered why they're teaching anti-racist math in schools? There is actually a video on my YouTube channel where I'm going through an 80-page teacher training manual for how to speak or how to teach anti-racist math. They teach, among other things, that you should have students write songs and poems about math and do interpretive dance about math. I'm not joking about that. This is a document from the Cambridge, Massachusetts School District in which they're talking about teaching elementary math equity. So in actual elementary school, they're teaching anti-racist math. And one of the questions they're trying to get at is how might we disrupt racial inequity in elementary math classrooms? This all has to do with getting back to equity. Equity is another term for Marxism. This is a high school teacher named Jessie Hagopian. Jessie Hagopian is a socialist teacher activist, and I got Jessie Hagopian on tape at the Socialism 2023 conference explicitly saying that the goal of teaching anti-racism in schools is to create a socialist world. This might be a little hard to hear because it was taken with a recorder in my pocket, but you will be able to see the words on the clip so that you can watch it that way. Let me just find the video.
I just want to wrap up by talking about why I think this struggle for anti-racist education right now should be a central fight for the left, for the socialist movement in this country, for everyone, and struggle for social justice. I think too often the left organizations have seen education as just one among many arenas of struggle instead of seeing it as a centrally, strategically important struggle that has the potential to bring together tens of millions of people. When you think of everyone as a public school student and all the parents and all the educators who are unionized, this is like a key value. Should have always been a major focus of those of us who want to transform the world and see a socialist society, as a site that can bring together millions of.
This should have always been a focus for those of us who want to transform society into a socialist society. They're talking about anti-racist education. I want to go back to, remember we watched this video earlier? Hang on. We watched this video earlier where basically these coffee shop workers were talking about how Israel steals private property, and when they let this woman into the bathroom, they saw written on the mirror, Zionism equals fascism. And I told you to kind of stick that one in your back pocket. What does it mean when they say that Zionism equals fascism? Well, guess what? We have on video a lecturer from Hofstra University, and this was actually at an anti-fascist conference hosted at Hofstra University. And in this lecture, we were very happy to hear that they were explicitly defining what the left means when they say the word fascism.
I do want to point out that I'm not a traditional economist, and I hope you feel that way by the time this is over. But it's neo, and someone mentioned earlier yesterday that being anti-fascist meant being anti-capitalist, and I'd like to just qualify that a little bit, because I believe being anti-fascist means being anti-free market capitalist. That there is liberal capitalism, managed capitalism that is possible.
Being anti-capitalist, being anti-fascist means being anti-free market capitalist. When they are saying the word fascist, they're not calling you a Nazi in the way that you might think of the term of Nazi. They're calling you a capitalist. This is why they're calling Israel fascist, because again, they believe that Israel is the capitalist oppressor who colonized the collective land in Palestine and imposed the oppressive force of capitalism on it. And they believe the Palestinians are currently in a revolution against the oppressive force of capitalism. It has nothing to do with Islam. It has nothing to do with Judaism. It has nothing to do with any of that. It only has to do with them hating capitalism. Here is another clip from Henry, Daddy Henry. Henry is our favorite for a reason. Henry again is going to say that fascism means capitalism. One moment, please.
And that's the great fight we're having today. I mean, the fight is not between simply democracy and authoritarianism. The fight is between democracy and a radical democratic socialist democracy, and a fight against capitalism. It's a fight for socialist democracy against two things. It's a fight against capitalism and it's a fight against fascism. And the fight against capitalism and fascism are part of the same body. They're linked. They're linked. You can't talk about fascism without talking about capitalism. I don't believe that anymore. And I think we need a new language to rephrase the struggle, and we need a new language to see education as central to politics itself. And I think that when we reduce education to question of methods, questions of technique, instrumental questions, we really have lost it, because we have no way of understanding education as part of what Adorno once called the totality. The totality. How is it being used as part of a larger totality to reproduce structures of power under the aegis of global capitalism that are destroying the world?
Are you guys starting to see a pattern here? They're saying the same words over and over and over again. And again, so like someone asked earlier, and the reason I kind of laugh when people ask me, like, does the left know that they're talking about capitalism? And again, I don't think that this is anyone here's fault. And I know that question comes in good faith. But it is so funny to me every time someone coming from I always assume people come from the right. Sometimes they don't, but I always make that assumption because it's usually the case. Whenever someone from the right asks me, does the left understand this is all about capitalism? And I have to explain to them, the left completely understands this. It's you guys who don't understand this. All I need to do is show a clip like this. Let me show you the ultimate leftist that a lot of people on the right associate with this, even though he wasn't the one that started this. Let me show you Barack Obama explicitly and unequivocally saying that capitalism created all of the world's problems, just so we can put this issue to bed once and for all.
But just because an economic system generates wealth and innovation doesn't mean it guarantees a good society. Because from the outset, turns out market-based systems have been compatible with slavery, caste systems, colonialization, war, exploitation, corruption, fraud, autocracy, the poisoning of our natural environment. Fortunately, thanks to the accumulated efforts, bit by bit, of reformers and organizers and visionaries not so different from many of you, some, mostly democratic governments, began to recognize the need to moderate capitalism's excesses.
Barack Obama in this video goes on to basically say that capitalism is responsible, again, for all the world's problems, and in order to fix the problems, then we need to replace it with some other form of managed capitalism, they call it, but really managed capitalism is another term for Marxism. Just to really beat this point home again, I want to show you one last video where this is actually from a leftist training that a bunch of my community members and I did a couple months back, where basically this is your average DEI training. This is something that's done in workplaces all over the country. In this particular training, they had a lot of teacher educators in it. They actually gave us a whole list of the attendees, which I then published, which they didn't like that too much, but I did, because I want people to know who's taking this type of training. Anyway, when we were in the training, I provoked them by explicitly asking them to explain capitalism. And I want you to see what happened when I provoke them to explain how capitalism is related to racism and whiteness and all of those other things. Hang on one moment, please.
So I want to just open up a little bit to some conversation, and I see Karen's question about how capital is an example of how capitalism contributes to inequities. Thank you for asking that, and I'm actually going to invite that question for anyone else here who has some thoughts about that. Anyone want to share an example about how capitalism contributes to inequities as a way of helping us share some understanding? Who can get into higher level? Yes, who has access to opportunities to have wealth and material good? Yes, that's definitely part of it. Generational wealth. Thank you, Greg. Yes, so that structural piece of kind of how history has been set up with policies, with legal, who has had access to resources or not, to education or not, how that leads to a possibility for generational wealth for some and not others. Paying low wages, not having stores in certain areas. Thank you. Thank you, McKenna, for that too. Also, just the kind of narrative of capitalism of our inherent worth is about how much we can accumulate and acquire, as opposed to our humanity. Yep. Relying there, Alana, thank you for also just naming that kind of the growth of how top owners have had enormous wealth gains while minimum wage has grown just slightly, and people are still, the people doing all the work in those companies are not having access to wealth and opportunity. Casey, I see your hand.
Yeah, I have a simple example that I often use. I'm at the point in my life now where I make enough money that I can go to Costco. So because I can buy 12 rolls of paper towel at a time, I can pay much less for things because I can afford to pay more up front. I save money in the long run. Whereas people who are experiencing poverty can't do that.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Great example.
Yes. Food desert.
Chris has his hand up as well.
Oh, thank you, Chris. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I was trying to put this in text, but it's proving difficult. In an organization where you're needing money to come in to, just function, right? In our society, like we need the money to pay everyone and all of those things. But sometimes folks at the top of the ladder are making decisions that might have concessions or impacts or ways that we, need to be flexible, even like overly flexible to accommodate, to get that money from some client or something like that. But then the people at the top who may be white, right? They're not the ones actually living out the concessions and the other things. Those impacts will land with people further down the ladder. And in my experience with, my Black colleagues often have to sort of pay those concession costs in order to support the organization getting that money coming in when they didn't make the concession themselves in the first place, right? Somebody higher up said, oh, sure, yeah, we can do that, right?
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate also that connection. And I said, Jaco, the connection to kind of capitalism is racial since its inception, right? That the idea of building wealth and who has access to wealth and goods, right, is when people have committed genocide and displaced people off of land so that they can own that land and create the wealth and goods that come from that, right? When people actually, through the chattel slavery, right, have decided that they have some right to own other humans and force them to work and under oppressive, abusive, horrific reality conditions while they make profit from what those workers do. Appreciate also that connection. And I said, Jaco, the connection to kind of capitalism is racial since its inception, right? That the idea of building wealth and who has access to wealth and goods, right, is when people have committed genocide and displaced people off of land so that they can own that land and create the wealth and goods that come from that, right? When people actually, through the chattel slavery, right, have decided that they have some right to own other humans and force them to work and under oppressive, abusive, horrific reality conditions while they make profit from what those workers do. That all of that is connected. And it's important as we are thinking about leading for equity, we're again continuing to sharpen our lens, seeing those connections to both structural, institutional, and then also what that means personally and interpersonally.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for all this.
If I may,
yes.
Karen, look at what your thoughtful question got going in that exchange. Thank you for asking it. How you doing? How you doing, Karen? Is that helpful? Helpful?
That was one of my greatest moments on Spy Stream ever, where I got basically, remember guys, the training that we were watching was a white affinity workshop. It was specifically for white people. And when asked about capitalism, they go into a whole thing about how capitalism upholds whiteness, because capitalism is what they're referencing when they say systemic racism. So I've kind of beaten you guys over the head tonight with a lot of information about whiteness being capitalism. Now, there are a couple more things I want to touch on that are going to get us into kind of a little bit of a setup for our session that we're going to do next week. And believe it or not, I used to cover all of these topics in the same presentation. And this is why I've had to split them up into multiple levels, because I'm sure everyone's feeling a little bit overwhelmed with the information already. But what I want people to see, and hopefully this answers Barry's question that he asked earlier about, like, what do you do with this information? The point of this exercise and to watch these videos is to recognize the patterns of the language as it shows up, because after a while, you're going to be able to recognize the language in the real world. And once you can recognize the language in the real world, that's going to give you a different assessment of the problem you're going to deal with. It's going to give you a different assessment of the people involved, and it's going to set you up to be able to best navigate what this means for you, and most importantly, for your family. And this is particularly true for those of you who have kids or grandkids. You need to get this information out there, because what we're going to go into next week in level 2 of this is not only how capitalism created the gender binary, which is men and women. It put men in the workplace where they earned all the money and had all the power. It put women in the home doing the unpaid labor of raising the nuclear family. It's also going to get into questions of parental rights and things like that. So I just want to give you a little bit of a preview. So this is not just about skin color. Every single thing the left does and the left talks about is directly related to the idea of abolishing capitalism. So again, I want to bring back Mary just for a quick hit on how capitalism created the gender binary. This is Mary presenting at the Socialism 2023 conference, explaining explicitly that capitalism created the gender binary, which for our purposes are men and women.
So on August 23rd, at the first debate of the U.S. Republican presidential primary candidates, multimillionaire Vivek Ramaswamy called for the abolition of the Department of Education. His argument hinged on how education starts in the home, and he closed by saying the nuclear family is the greatest form of government known to mankind. His glorification of the nuclear family is representative of the value set held by most on the far right. The idea that heterosexual cisgender couples with children are the beating heart of a free and prosperous nation. Underneath that belief, we see its ideological roots deep in the gender binary. The gender binary is a white supremacist invention born from men in power in the division of labor and care work in primitive Western Europe. I know, Oliver, it sucks. Male paternity became the absolute determinant of heritable wealth and property as class society was developing. Men in power sought exclusive right to their power, and women were excluded from participation in power structures. Domestic labor and care work were feminized and devalued. The gender binary was one aspect of the cultural devastation wrought by colonization. Prior to colonization, indigenous cultures the world over had more than two genders, with trans and non-binary individuals often holding positions of leadership. expansive, non-binary gender expression, and reproductive autonomy through contraception and abortion are ancient, sacred practices, and their repression has long been a tool of white supremacy.
That's one of my favorite clips from Mary because she just says everything all in one clip. And I hope at this point, if you're new to this, I hope you're starting to recognize some of the language showing up over and over again. When Mary says white supremacy, she means capitalism. When Mary says colonization, she also means capitalism. When Mary's talking about the patriarchy, she also means capitalism. These are all just references to different aspects of capitalism, but they appear in different contexts, but depending on exactly what they're attacking at any given time. And just in case people don't believe that the left really does want to abolish the nuclear family, and we will go into this much more in depth next week, these are just two books that are written by two of our favorite Abolish the Family socialists. The first is called Family Abolition, Capitalism and the Communizing of Care by Emmy O'Brien. We actually just watched Emmy O'Brien this past week for Socialism Saturday, if people want an introduction. Although she didn't really play that big of a role in it. She was more of a moderator, but we watched her extensively before. And then, of course, my favorite Abolish the Family socialist, Sophie Lewis, with Abolish the Family, a manifesto for care and liberation. We are going to hear more from Sophie next week. But these ideas have permeated into culture. So next week, we're also going to see training from the mayor of Washington, D.C., talking about how they want to de-gender language to get rid of the gender binary. That's an attack on capitalism. We're going to talk about the purpose of Drag Queen Story Hour. We're going to talk about some of the ways your kids are learning this in schools. And this is the source of the attacks on parental rights, because you can see here, this is actually one of the best articles, this one called Children Are Not Property. In this article, the person who writes it actually confesses in the article that she is a socialist and that she is attacking parental rights because she believes that children are considered to be a form of private property. That's what we're talking about here. We're also going to be talking about how queer is not actually about being gay or trans. Queer is a rejection of the normal. It's a rejection of normativity. Normativity is another way to say capitalism. Of course, they actively reject capitalism. And we're just going to allow Mary to wrap this up for us. This is the last clip that we're going to watch tonight. We're probably going to watch it next week as well. But I want to make explicitly clear that their goal is to abolish the family as a way of eliciting their Marxist revolution.
Some of their fears may be legitimate, because destroying the nuclear family through sexual liberation and queer relationship anarchy sounds pretty great.
Destroying the nuclear family. Oh, I didn't mean to play that again. Apologies. Destroying the nuclear family through queer relationship anarchy sounds pretty great. What you guys are all going to see when we get through next week is that all of these concepts are related. Capitalism, which is whiteness, created the gender binary, which created the nuclear family, which upholds capitalism. And these are all things that the left believes that they need to abolish in order to elicit their Marxist revolution. So words to watch out for when you're dealing with the left, things like abolition, liberation, solidarity, comrade. We've been seeing the college students say comrade all over the place. Social justice, radical, queer, equity, collective. Almost all of those words are a reference to socialism. Here are some ideas you need to watch out for: critical race theory, gender ideology, queer theory, reproductive justice, culturally responsive teaching, anti-racism, Black Lives Matter, gender and sexuality alliances, rainbow clubs, social emotional learning. All of those things are indoctrination factories for Marxism. I've got a couple of handouts that you guys can avail yourself of. You can find them on my Substack. I also have put them in the handout section of the webinar. So if you want to download the PDFs, you can do that. We're not going to go over it in depth. That these are just charts I've made to help you kind of understand these concepts. This is a general chart that looks really, really complicated, but it's basically explaining how race, gender, queer, and family all work together. So this will help you as we're moving into our more advanced section in week 2. You can also download this cheat sheet if you want a specific reminder about why whiteness means capitalism. And that's all we have for tonight. We're already at 2 hours. I cannot believe I used to cover all 3 of those topics in the same presentation, but here we are. And I haven't seen any more questions come in, possibly because you guys got asked all your good questions at the very beginning, and then I just kept hammering you with video after video after video after that. And so you thought better of asking questions that time. Barry, I saw you apologize for the diversion. You don't need to apologize at all. Like I said, I do welcome questions. It's just like, it's sometimes it's hard to explain. Like what Barry did is he asked possibly the most difficult question to answer, which is, what do you do with this? Because the answer is so unsatisfactory in that you will know when it happens, but it really is just the best answer that I have at the time, or it's the best answer I have right now. Maybe I need to work on that, but that is the best answer I have right now. So Barry, you did nothing wrong. You were perfectly fine. Let me see if I have any more questions that have come in. All right, I have one from Highlander. People on the right use the word solidarity. Oh, don't stop using that word. No. Don't use the word solidarity, conservatives, please. When you're using the term solidarity, what you're saying is that you are in partnership with the left. You do not want to be in partnership with the left. So when the left is saying they're in solidarity, they're acting in solidarity. What they mean is they are being a good comrade. They are part of the party. They are part of the collective. So being in solidarity is something that you do not want to be. So just stop using the word. There's no instance that I can think of where it is an absolute emergency to use that word. Jocelyn says, so freaking unbelievably good. Best presentation ever on modern socialism. I can't wait for next week. Thank you, Jocelyn. I really do appreciate that. Let's see. Diana says, agreed. Very good. Thank you, Diana. Sharon, nice job. Thank you, guys. I really do appreciate it. And congratulations. You just sat through 2 hours of socialism, but this was a crash course to get you guys up to speed really quickly. I will be making this recording available. All I ask in return, and thank you to everyone who donated when you signed up. I do appreciate the donations. If you didn't donate, that's fine too. I do ask, please help me share this information. Because the reason that I'm doing these presentations is I want to teach other people as much of what I know as possible so that you can go out and teach other people what you know, and you can help introduce people, and you can invite them to my streams. You can share this class with them. You can get them, watching the clips that I put on the Substack and stuff like that. But please, the very best favor you can do for me is share this information out. The more people who understand this language, the better off we're going to be. All right. So we all got to work together for this, and I need your help in order to be able to do it. So thank you all for joining me here tonight. And if you guys have any questions that come up afterwards, please feel free to drop in on one of my live streams. I do stream Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern time on YouTube, on X, and on Rumble, unless I cancel it like I did today. But no, normally I do that. And then, of course, join me every week for Socialism Saturday. I would love to have you. Alex says, I do guerrilla marketing. Buy some stupid cheap flash drives with all the materials and give them away for nothing. I mean, Alex, I would love to have you involved. We're actually going to be doing some cool guerrilla marketing techniques that I think you'll like. So I do appreciate it. All right, guys. I will see everyone next week. Make sure you're signed up if you're not already. You do not automatically get signed up for next week by signing up for this week. That's a completely separate presentation. So make sure you're signing up, and you will get a copy of the recording probably in a couple hours tonight. And yeah, guys, that's all we have. Take care, and we'll see you soon. Bye.